The next speaker, it's Amanda Cawston. She is assistant professor of philosophy here at Tilburg University. Especially her focus is political philosophy and the ethics of violence and non-violence. And she also addresses topics in animal ethics as well. And today she will give a small talk about an ethical critique, actually, into lab-grown in vitro meat, posing that it's not actually an ethical solution. So please give a big applause for Amanda Cawston. This one.
Thank you. Oh, all right. Can you hear me all right? It's working? Great. Thanks. Thanks very much for the invitation. Very pleased to be here. I wanted to start off by saying I'm a philosopher. Surprise. But my initial training, actually right out of high school, was biotechnology. I was going to save the world's problems by science and technology. Very motivated by the potential of science and technology to make the world a better place. I still think that, so it's not like I changed my mind on that. I did move away from biotech, partly, I couldn't articulate it at the time, but a bit of a frustration with how to think about some of these problems. In particular, a lot of them seem to be of our own making, the problems that we were trying to fix. And I suspected that part of the underlying problem was how we think about the world, how we think about how to treat each other, that generated a lot of the problems that we then tried to use technology to fix. So I'm happy to be here today to share how I think philosophy adds something to that story, how it can complement our efforts in science and tech to get a clear view of our problems and their sources. Today, I am going to look at a particular focus on a specific technology that has been touted as one of the problems, one of the solutions to a problem, and dig into it a little bit from a philosophical perspective. So this is in vitro meat is my topic for today. First of all, what is it? What are we talking about? It's also called cultured meat sometimes, or lab meat, or part of a cellular agricultural movement. It's the production of meat products via tissue culture technology. Here is a helpful infographic about what this consists of. You start with a live animal, a pig, for example, and take a biopsy. The animal still lives. This is a relatively painless procedure. Extract some muscle tissue, some cells, and then use some enzymes and other treatments to convert those into stem cells. Or you can use embryonic cells instead of this biopsy procedure. And then you proliferate them. This is the lab part, either in a big tank. Currently, that's being worked on right now, but that's the idea. You mass produce these cells. Then you want them to look a certain way and act a bit like muscle cells, so you would place them on some scaffolding. This trains them so they become more muscle-like. And then there's, of course, processing. The result still needs to be mixed with other materials, dyes, additives, etc., to get something that looks like meat at the end of the day. This is not science fiction. This is really, at least at some level, happening. At least a 20-year history so far. In 2002, the first lab-grown meat was eaten. This is a very small scale. They had, one petri dish size of meat, and it was goldfish tissue initially. Apparently that's easier to grow, I don't know. 2008, PETA, the People for Ethical Treatment of Animals, animal rights organization, actually offered a $1 million prize to the first company to produce lab-grown chicken meat by 2012. So they're really on board with this movement. 2013, the first lab-grown beef burger was produced and eaten in London. This one burger was incredibly expensive. Again, the amount of energy and effort to produce a burger's worth of meat is quite substantial. And today there are, in the last 5 years or so, quite a lot of corporate interest in investment in making this work. There's a couple of companies, if you're interested, to look up what they're offering. Now, of course, why develop this? You might already have guessed what some of the proposed benefits are of producing meat in this way instead of the old-fashioned way of in an animal first. So there's lots of, the motivation here is a lot of ethical benefits of producing meat in this way. I thought I would show you this screenshot. This is from the Eat Just, or was it Just Eat? I get it mixed up each time. They produce this good meat product, or they're aiming to. And this is a slide from their website. I'm not being sponsored by them. I just thought it showed it well. And this really captures what their message is, why this is such a good thing. Say, we'll always eat meat. To share the planet together, we have to do it differently. And they claim to produce or be able to produce meat without harm. Harm here meaning, of course, harm to the animals involved in meat production. But also you can see from the picture, they're suggesting environmental damage associated with regular livestock farming, and also human health as well. So I'm going to summarize briefly what some of the common ethical arguments are around the production of this in vitro meat. These focus around these three main themes are sort of human health, the planet, and animals. On the human health side of things, in vitro meat has been thought of as a way to better control and protect humans from certain zoonotic diseases. These are diseases that move between different species. So you're taking you can control their environment a lot better and test products before they're consumed. You would reduce or even eliminate the need of using antibiotics in industrial farming. You could also, the lab is this wonderful place. You can control so many things. So perhaps you could even control the cholesterol level in the meat product or tweak different nutrition factors of the final product. Sounds all good. Couple quick things. It's currently quite expensive, these meat products. It's still very much in a development stage, but it is incredibly expensive. So the extent to which these health benefits would be enjoyed by humans in general, this would not be possible, as it's going to be rich people who would be able to enjoy these benefits. And as I mentioned, there's still a lot of processing that happens. It's not just sort of pure meat tissue that is produced. It's mixed again with additives and dyes and other stabilizers and things to produce a final product that looks and tastes and smells. Texture is something recognizable. So that might reduce the sort of health benefit picture of such meat. On the planet side of things, it's celebrated as a way to reduce the carbon output associated with the production of meat. You don't need to cut down rainforests to make pasture for livestock. This looks like a really good reason to pursue in vitro meat. Currently, this is not been achieved. So the current productions, they've not been scaled up yet. Again, they're still at a development stage, but it's currently still quite energy intensive, the production of such products. And on the animal side, this is perhaps one of the most motivating points for me. You eliminate the slaughter of animals. You just need a biopsy or embryonic cells. You don't need to kill any animals to produce this meat. You eliminate or at least reduce the suffering that's involved in the production of meat from the animal side. And one of these companies even suggested it enables us to have a respectful attitude. There's still lurking problems, though, with this claim, and that's the growth medium that the cells need to multiply and grow. Has traditionally relied on what's called fetal bovine serum, which is what it sounds like. It's serum produced from the blood of fetal bovines, baby cows. And they've had a really hard time finding an alternative that is not derived from that source. So currently, there have been one or two companies that have claimed that they have an alternative, but from what I've read, maybe we'll find out later if this is true, that this is an unsubstantiated claim or not quite perfect yet. But this is still currently a problem. Okay. Now, this quick overview and the problems that I've hinted at so far in terms of the success of these ethical benefits of in vitro meat, a lot of these problems you could think of as technical problems. Like, yeah, it's currently expensive, yeah, it's energy intensive, but these are technical problems that with more research, more study, we can scale up and we can address these problems. These are not necessarily insurmountable. I want to raise one more problem, though, an ethical problem, which I don't think is the same kind of thing. It's not solvable with just more technology. And that's a concern for our attitudes. Okay. So as Hannah said in her introduction, my aim here is to suggest that despite all these proposed ethical benefits, I think there are serious ethical costs and risks associated with producing something like in vitro meat. So I want to say that in vitro meat actually fails to address one of the fundamental problems with meat eating, and therefore does fail to be a satisfactory ethical solution to the problem of meat eating. I'm going to do two things. First, I'm going to try and say what I think this fundamental problem is with meat eating, and suggest it lies in the attitudes that it expresses towards animals. And second step, I want to show that those attitudes are retained when we move from traditional meat to in vitro meat, and therefore we have not solved the problem. All right, I should maybe preface this by saying I don't want to discount the incredible benefits of reducing or eliminating slaughter of animals and suffering. Those are important things. I'm not going to say that those count for nothing, but they don't count for everything. And I worry that there will be problems in other areas if the attitude problem is not addressed. All right. So, quick two-line summary of animal welfare ethics. Animal welfare ethics traditionally has centered on two main avenues or questions, issues related to how we might think about animals' ethical status. So we might be concerned about animals having certain rights, and that might be why it's morally wrong to treat them in certain ways, either to eat them or use them in scientific experimentation or in other ways. That might be wrong because they have rights not to be used in that kind of way. Or you might be interested in suffering. That what is morally wrong with certain practices is the pain and suffering that creatures undergo or experience as part of that process. And on either of these routes, it actually looks quite plausible that something like in vitro meat solves these problems, right? If animals have rights not to be killed or eaten or mistreated, we're not doing that anymore with in vitro meat. We take a small biopsy. It's really hard to say that that would be against violating a right. And same with suffering. We would be, if we can get rid of the fetal bovine serum part, we would be eliminating the suffering criticism of meat production. So on the ethical front, this looks promising. But my first goal here is to show you that there might be something more, another feature that's ethically or sort of morally relevant to our evaluation here. I'm going to do that by talking about two problems. One is to give you an analogy that might prompt your intuitions to think that there's something more. And one discussion of eating people. It's not what you think, so hang on. Be talking about philosophical claims about why we don't eat people. Okay. So these are going to show, I hope, why we think there's something in addition to concerns about rights or concerns about suffering. So I'm going to start with the analogy. So here's the first, this is the current suggestion of moving from traditional meat to meat star. So this is how philosophers talk sometimes, in vitro meat. If we do this move, we eliminate animal suffering that's currently required to produce meat. So tick on the suffering side. No animals' rights are violated. So tick, we've got rights covered. We've even got a sort of pragmatism point here covered in that, and we hear this frequently, it's unlikely that everyone's going to adopt vegetarianism. So given that sort of practical reality, if you're concerned about animal ethics, then moving to meat star, to in vitro meat, will avoid this sort of practical problem that humans aren't going to get on board with vegetarianism. So without meat star, people are still going to eat meat. Animals will still suffer. So we should go to in vitro meat. Okay, so here's the analogy. So this is the current structure. Let's look at another example that follows the same structure. Let's talk about child pornography, as one does on a Thursday afternoon. So imagine we suggest moving from child pornography to digital child pornography, CP star. So, and this is technically possible in lots of ways today as well. So we produce pornography that looks like children are involved, but it's produced artificially through digitalized images. If we do that, no child will suffer in the production of that pornography. Of course, the suffering of children in production is a frequent criticism of why child pornography is bad. No children's rights will be violated if no specific images are used. It's a generic image, for example. And we have a pragmatism point here as well, that despite our concerted efforts to eradicate child pornography, it persists. And perhaps we should pursue alternatives that address the current suffering that continues on without this alternative that we could make available. Okay, so what I'm hoping here is that your intuitions on the child pornography example are, no, there's something still wrong with digital child pornography. I might recognize the reduced suffering, but there's still something wrong about people looking at children in this kind of way. So these are structurally equivalent, but the second I suspect many of you find morally abhorrent. It permits and encourages thinking of children in a certain way as objects for one's sexual gratification, which we think in general as a way of thinking about children is wrong. And I think this example helps to motivate the idea that our attitudes, how we think about a group or an individual, that matters. And I'm hoping that this supports the similar view in the first case as well about in vitro meat. Our attitudes about animals might still be what matters. And I think the burden here is on supporters of in vitro meat to say what's relevantly different about these two cases. If you want to think, no, in vitro meat is still fine, you need to say what is different between these two cases. Okay, so that's the analogy. Now onto the eating people point. Cora Diamond, pictured here, wrote a fascinating paper in 1978 called Eating Meat and Eating People. And she asks us to think about, we don't eat people. Why is that? And it's not because of rights or concerns about suffering. We don't not eat people because of we'd be violating some of their rights or concern about suffering. It's something else. And she thinks it's because it's a consequence of thinking about people in a certain way, having this fellow creature response. She talks about, she has this opening story. I think it's Orwell who talks about this naked soldier story, fighting in the war, got the rifle out, waiting for enemies to appear. Enemy soldier pops up, but they were caught off guard and they have their pants down because they were going to the loo, as it were, and is running across in a panic with their trousers around their ankles. And Orwell notes it suddenly is a human. It's suddenly not an enemy soldier, some abstract entity that I can kill. It's a fellow human that suddenly it becomes really difficult to shoot at. And this is the difference between an enemy soldier who is killable and having this it's a fellow creature, that's a human that, it's not so killable anymore. And that's the connection for why we don't eat people. They're not edible. That's not what we do to humans, that we see as humans, as part of our fellow creaturehood. This fellow creature response, she describes it, is this feeling of being in a certain boat, as it were, as our fellows in mortality, in life on this earth. And that's not having that feeling towards animals is what makes them edible for us and distinguishes animals from humans. We don't see animals this way, and that's why they are edible. We see them as edible. Almost done, if you're concerned about time. All right, so this sense of animals as being edible as opposed to humans, this lack of a fellow creature feeling, this problematic attitude that I'm talking about, this is retained when we move from traditional meat to in vitro meat. Animals are still thought of as edible. That's the whole point of in vitro meat. Why are plant meats not enough? There's lots of great alternatives available made from plants. Why the push for those aren't enough? We need alternatives made from animals specifically. The response is, well, those aren't real meat. What I need is actual from an animal because it's animals that are edible. And that's what's kept constant from the move from traditional meat to in vitro meat. So developing in vitro meat perpetuates the view that animals are edible. It doesn't force us to confront this lack of a fellow creature feeling. It continues, it's really important to grow this kind of cell culture because animals are for eating. So this blocks the fellow creature response. I do think, sort of as a consequence of this lack of a fellow creature feeling towards animals, does mean that animals will still be eaten. So the production of in vitro meat I don't think will mean that there won't be animals slaughtered still for eating. I think there will be your in vitro meat option for some people and a luxury meat option for wealthy people, in the same way that we currently have the differentiation between fake leather and real leather, or fake fur and real fur. The real fur, the real leather, these are the expensive high status options, right? The introduction of fake fur or fake leather has not eliminated the production of fur or leather. And this absence of a fellow creature feeling for animals, which is tied to thinking of them still as edible, I think will enable their continued poor treatment in other domains, like in scientific testing, in sports, in disrespect for their habitat needs, etc. Okay, so just to quickly wrap up, I wanted to say, the point here is to say in vitro meat does not address this problem. Despite all the sort of other ethical tick boxes that it manages to address, it does not address the fundamental problem with meat eating. And in that case, I think it fails to be an ethical solution. I do want to suggest at this last stage a sort of stronger claim. Not only does it not address it, I think it actually helps hide this problem from us. So it actually makes the problem worse, that we think we can be good animal lovers and eat this meat without recognizing we've not changed our attitudes really towards animals. So it conceals this crucial ethical dimension by leaving our attitudes unscrutinized. And finally, just a general comment, perhaps on the general theme of technology and food, or any human challenge. I do think many problems, of course, have technical and ethical aspects, and we do need to investigate how these interact with each other and how they're co-produced. And remember, of course, that many ethical problems are tied to how we think about others and how that translates into how we treat others. And technology can make it easier to confront this dimension, or it can make it easier to hide from this dimension of our activities as well. So that's it for now. Thank you very much for your attention.